Thank you. Hello, I am Irene Ihere of CDRH's Office of Communication and Education. Welcome to the FDA's 52nd in a series of virtual town hall meetings to help answer technical questions about the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2 during the public health emergency. Today, Dr. Timothy Stenzel, Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, and Dr. Christian Ross, both from CDRH, will provide a brief update. Following opening remarks, we will open the line for your questions related to the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2. Please remember that during this town hall, we are not able to respond to questions about specific submissions that might be under review. Now, I give you Timothy.
Hello. Hopefully my sound here is good. Irene, yours was breaking up just a little bit. Okay, good. Thanks. So today is the 52nd town hall. We missed a couple of weeks due to various holidays and other events. But obviously now we're over a year since we started these, and we're still getting a lot of callers, and there's still work to do. So we look forward to continuing to work with you on all of this. I had a couple of introductory remarks, then would finish up with a discussion of new pooling and serial testing guidance that came out yesterday. And then Chris, who thankfully has joined us today, we'll go into some of the details on the recommendations in that guidance. So to start off, our current priorities for review remain unchanged. We are really looking for the biggest bang for increasing access to testing for all Americans and for all those in the United States. That includes point of care, home, and extremely high throughput central lab tests. And as I discussed, this new pooling guidance that we'll talk about will continue along those vein and continue to expand, we believe, greatly testing as we begin to more widely reopen. I did want to just pause and talk about, some of the totals for authorization roughly to date. I totaled these earlier in the week. We've now authorized 63 home collections for molecular central lab testing and 3 actually in-home tests, 2 of which are over the counter. I'm adding that to 9 point-of-care tests, so we have 12 authorizations for molecular devices for that can also be at point-of-care. And then turning over to the antigen side, we've authorized 6 submissions for in-home use. 4 of those authorizations are for over-the-counter. Adding to the 12 point-of-care devices, we then have 18 authorizations for point-of-care uses. So we're making progress on that front. And, of course, I think last week, Toby mentioned the Thermo Fisher amplitude authorization that can test up to, and this is without pooling, up to 8,000 results a day on one instrument. And so should you be able to add pooling to that, you actually, can really, even above that, greatly increase testing. So turning over to the new pooling guidance. So, we have made a number of pooling authorizations as also for screening authorizations. And These are, for the pooling, it's all been central lab high sensitivity molecular assays. And we've learned a lot from all those submissions, and we have enough data from the previous submissions and our analysis of those so that we could move forward with this new guidance that pertains to swabs and high complexity lab tests that have been previously authorized, and to offer these new streamlined pathways. In particular, we have not seen in the data we've received any issues when in pools of 3x or less, as long as the test itself is a high sensitivity molecular central lab test. And so that to us gave us reassurance that we could offer the pathway of if somebody under this new pathway wants to just offer a 3x pool, but we don't need to review the data. We'll continue to monitor performance on market. Of course, if there's any issues, we will address them. To go into just a bit more detail, so this is a new streamlined approach to add pooled serial screening claims to certain authorized tests for use in serial testing programs. So our previous review of data and authorizations allows us to go forward with this. And the serial testing nature of this provides some additional mitigation for these authorizations to happen without the FDA first reviewing the data. They are limited, as I said, to pooled anterior nasal respiratory specimens in a serial testing program. And so that many of the molecular diagnostic tests that have already received EUA authorization have this pathway open to them. So these new authorizations, the new pathway would offer authorization for both diagnosis and screening, and when tested at least once per week as part of the serial testing program. To utilize this approach, EUA holders would follow the guidance. If validation is required, go ahead and do that. If not, if it's a 3x pool, then once you completed the validation or you decide you're going 3x, notify us, and we'll update the labeling and post this on the FDA website. For the public, including organizations purchasing these tests or using these services for testing pooled specimens in a serial testing program, can see the full list of tests that are then covered under this umbrella authorization. Last month we introduced a new supplement template for those seeking emergency use authorization for certain tests for screening with serial testing, and we've authorized a number of those. This pooling and serial testing amendment really builds upon that earlier action. All serial testing programs should include retesting individuals as needed in case there are any potential false negatives. And of course, testing alone does not replace the need for other public health measures such as like getting vaccinated, social distancing, washing hands, and wearing masks. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to provide some more granularity to this new amendment. Chris?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. So there are multiple validation pathways in this EUA amendment, and it does cover both swab and media pooling. So if the existing, as Tim mentioned, if the existing EUA has performance with clinical samples that are above 95%, then that 3x pooling claim is available as long as there's the serial testing program. And these claims can be added to your existing EUA, either for swab or media pooling. There's also two other pooling levels, one at 5x, one at 10x. And these are both discussed again for swab and media pooling. And to get those kind of additional pooling claims, there are two approaches which are the same for the 5x and 10x. And the first is an analytical study. And in this case, it's the study is intended to establish that the pooling approach is impacting test performance in a predictable manner. This is evaluated by testing contrived samples in a head-to-head type of study, both obviously individually and pooled. And if the CT scores follow what was expected due to the design of the pooling approach, for instance, if you're looking at a 10x media pooling approach, you have a predictable 10x dilution effect on the CT score. There's acceptance criteria that's laid out there, and if that acceptance criteria is met, then you can go ahead and notify with that particular data set. There's also the option to test pooled and individual clinical samples. And this is very similar to the approach that's already laid out in the molecular template. We are looking for 20% to be near the LOD, and this amendment calls for testing of 20 individual positives and then positive clinical samples, and then take those same 20 and test them in the proposed pooling approach. And I think the target there is an 85% agreement and 5%, less than 5% invalid rate. So, the regulatory path, I think the validation protocol, the acceptance criteria, all of those pieces are clearly laid out in the amendment letter. And I believe the intent here is to provide a kind of a recipe for, what can be followed. And, this is again to support quickly adding these claims to your existing EUA. That's it. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Chris. And obviously, we can take questions on this or any other topics, and we'll turn it over to the operator to open it up for questions.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press star 1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you need to withdraw your question, press star 2. Again, to ask a question, please press star 1. Our first question will come from Susan Sharp. Your line is open.
Thank you, and thanks, Tim, for this year of these conferences. They're very helpful. I did hear Chris say that regarding the pooling and serial strategies, that it can be done with either swab or media pooling. Has there been any approvals given for swab pooling? I kind of tried to look over the list last night. They all look like that they were aliquot or liquid pooling. Are there any out there that have gotten an EUA for swab pooling?
Chris may know better. I'm not aware of it. One of the challenges with swab pooling is that you can't immediately deconvolute what's going on, with a reflex test unless you collect 2 swabs. So we have heard developers who are interested in swab pooling, and in some ways, at least analytically, clinically, there is lower risk for false negatives if you do swab pooling. But I may be incorrect. There may be at least one. I'm thinking of one, but Chris will know better, perhaps, if we've authorized swab pooling.
I am going to check on that. I believe we do have one, and I can get that name for you just in a moment here.
Thank you.
And we can pause and give that name later. So do you have any other questions at this time?
Nope, that was it. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Amy Wright. Your line is open.
Hello. Thank you for taking my question. My question today is in regards to a professional use testing, and if you wanted to specify essentially no age restriction, like from that can be used with patients from between 2 to 80. In terms of testing the various ages, is there some sort of representative test? Sorry, not representative. Percentages that we need to look for in our testing, or can we just do show we have representative testing within the various age groups?
Yeah, well, the professional use, you mean point of care in office use,
correct.
where samples are obtained by some healthcare professional. We have a lower level of, we see a lower level of risk for different age groups when that's the case. Where we really focus on this is in the home collection or home testing situation where kids underage, won't be able to collect a sample themselves, and we want to see that an adult in the home can collect a sample on an underage child down to age 2, and show adequate performance and safety of the collection and of the testing. You don't need to find, a 2-year-old in your study. We sort of break up the underage kids into two bigger buckets, and I'm forgetting exactly which ones they are, but obviously somewhere in the range of 2 to 8 and 8 to 13 are, I believe, are the two buckets, and Chris may be able to correct me. And I don't believe we asked for a definite age distribution in the point of care setting, but I could be wrong. We could have updated that, but because we feel really assured that those who routinely collect respiratory samples in the point of care environment can do this accurately. The other thing I did want to mention, and I forgot to mention that at the top of the call when I gave my introductory remarks, and this is a little bit tangential to your question, but it offers me the opportunity to bring this up. And that is, we really are encouraging those who ultimately want to go to a home use test, whether prescription or over the counter, to really kind of focus their development efforts around that setting if they can. Because if they first do it staged and get a point of care authorization, they then really are required to do another clinical study in the home. When you go, if you were to go directly to a home use situation, and performance, meets expectations when consumers are doing the collection and testing and/or interpretation of the test results themselves, the test automatically gets a deemed waived status. They automatically can be used in the point of care, moderate complexity, high complexity environments, because we've really tested it at the most extreme version of untrained users, and so there could be a lot of synergy and streamlining and decrease in cost of development if you feel comfortable that a test can go immediately to clinical studies in the home environment. I'll pause there and see if I've been correct. Check with Chris. I always check with Chris. Most of the time it's offline to this call, but Chris, any corrections on what I've said?
No, I don't have any corrections. Sound good.
So what you're saying is, for if we are going to focus on professional use for now, we don't necessarily have to do like a certain percentage, just as long as they're representative in those specific age groups, 2 to 8 to 13. What about the older than 65 age group?
Same thing there. It's nice if you can get an all-comers representation of ages in your clinical study sites, as long as you can get permissions from IRBs and consent as needed. And that's always ideal. So, and just it should all work the same. in that environment, and it should speed, your study to get to, minimum number of positives that we recommend as quickly as possible.
So, and then if it's for home use, does the same rule kind of apply? I mean, I know the focus there is basically for the younger children, that the sample is acquired by an adult. Do we have to have a certain number of that, or can we just show that we have?
I would refer to the template recommendations. We have a certain percentage of the positives that if you're going to claim down to a certain age, down to 2 eventually, that we have adequate representation in among the positives in those age groups, and all the intervening negatives in those age groups as well.
Okay, we're just making a positive and negative. Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Franco Calderon. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking my call again. So we are working on, or have been for almost a year now, on an antigen test for self-use at home. And we've done several small, I guess you could call them clinical feasibility studies, just to see how the test has been performing. And we've noticed that there's a nice concordance there. So regarding the retrospective we noticed that the CT values are consistently pushing upwards of about 28, maybe even 29 CT and then on the lower end, let's see, 15 or so. What can we do to get to the 10-20% that FDA requires that is considered the low positives, which are above CT 30, I believe. I believe that's what the guidance says, that 10 to 20% need to be in that range. We can get to 28, 28.7, but it has been difficult to find the samples that we can play with that would put us at above CT 30. Not that the test cannot do it, because we haven't been able to locate those specimens. But do you have any recommendations or maybe suggestions on how we can do that? Again, we're very confident about the lower levels. We've been able to find samples that go pretty low and then up again to about 28.7 or so. Any suggestions you may have?
Yeah. So one obvious thing to check is some of the molecular assays don't count the first 10 or 15 cycles. So make sure that the EUA authorized high sensitivity molecular test that you're using doesn't do that. For example, I know that the M2000 Abbott assay and the Lyra Quidel assay do cut off CT, so you have to add 10. I think it's 10 in both cases to the number to get the actual cycle threshold. But assuming that's not the case, first of all, it's kind of good news that you're getting in your studies, you're getting things that are shifted towards the higher positives, because we have heard in some studies that that they've seen a shift towards lower positives, higher CTs in their studies, and they get sort of an over sampling of really lower viral load samples and higher CTs. And I've always advised those folks to make sure that they're collecting within 5 to 7 days of symptom onset if they're going for a symptomatic test subject. This is I know what we do for molecular tests, and that we have allowed a dilution of higher positives into the closer to the range around LOD that we want to see for and cutoff for molecular tests. It's a little more challenging with an antigen test. We to date, if it's an all-comers study and you're testing as many people as you can enroll at your study subjects and study sites, and you're enrolling in multiple sites, and you're enrolling within your inclusion-exclusion criteria on the number of days post-symptoms. We've typically seen, when you go for those 30 positives for point of care, we've typically seen, or for the home use, we typically have seen a good range of CTs in the studies. It hasn't been an issue unless there was some, and we've unfortunately seen with some developers a more biased approach in selection of subjects. But again, if you take all comers within day 0 to 5 or day 0 to 7 and symptoms, we've typically, when there's been an unbiased selection of the subjects, we've typically seen good range. So if you're really concerned about this, I would approach through a pre-sub if you don't have, if you haven't already interacted with our staff on this particular topic, and ask our experts what they think about this, because it is a little more complicated, especially if you're using a direct swab antigen test, to be able to deal with that. Okay? I would say that you can also look at, supplementing more patients who are further from symptoms. That's the obvious situation. Although we've seen very high CTs early in the early days, as high as 40 in the first couple of days of symptoms. So that's just the initial thought I have. But I think it's fortunately not something that is really common. But our team can help you out. Okay.
Thank you for that. And to your point about the different instruments giving different ranges of CT values, we have experienced that ourselves, because when we got the retrospective specimens, these were confirmed positives because we wanted to do the short thing, and it was a particular brand, and it was a high-performance RT-PCR associated with that assay. And then, we wanted to double-check. So we took double specimens, and we took the second specimen to another lab with a high-performance RT-PCR, and we got a different CT, even though the specimens were taken on the same day from the same patient. So it's looking really nice for us, and we're being able to get up to those high CT values, but again, we've experienced difficulty getting past 29 at this point. But thanks for your comment.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll just add that CTs are not going to be the same on the same samples across different instruments and assays. And these are not calibrated quantitative tests. If everybody developed, or if even one team developed a truly quantitative test linked to the international standard for SARS-CoV-2, then you could begin to standardize CTs. But then again, there's this high variability in sample collection that is impossible to standardize. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Elizabeth Bernelli. Your line is open.
Okay, first I'd like to thank you for this forum. We found it very informative. Our question is regarding the timing of submissions to the FDA for EUAs. It's our understanding that for molecular tests, the EUA submission must be received within 15 days post the start of testing, provided that your validation is complete. Does the same time requirement apply for non-prescription home collection kit EUA submissions?
So home collection, home testing, and point of care testing is not covered under the notification policy. So those are applications that we want to review and authorize before, typically before they are authored. It's the high-end molecular and moderate complexity submissions that, Chris, you're here with me, but sometimes I miss Dobie too when she's not on the call. But, be sure and check the notification policy, but definitely home testing is not, home collection or home testing is not something that can be notified. That's something that, go ahead and submit your EUA, and home testing, home collection is a top priority for us, and so we'll get on those as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Michael Patz. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. Just curious to know if the recent expansion or amendment for the pooling with molecular tests will be expanded to antigen tests.
We will. This umbrella policy is based on accumulated data and review of existing authorizations. We haven't authorized an antigen pool yet, and it doesn't apply to antigen tests right now. Antigen tests are, it'd be nice to see an application where sensitivity is great enough with an antigen test that you can pool. But so far we haven't authorized one. And certainly then, if we haven't been able to authorize it, review it, and understand the performance characteristics around that kind of pooling and testing, we're not going to move forward at this time with an umbrella policy that covers that until we've accumulated enough understanding of the science to make a good regulatory decision.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question will come from Glenn Fay. Your line is open.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my call. We appreciate the effort here by FDA. We're planning to put in a pre-EUA submission with protocols for an at-home neutralizing antibody test. It's a lateral flow device preferred with the finger prick method. And the question that I have is, essentially, to use the comparative, the plaque reduction neutralization test, it requires serum. How do we approach that dilemma? Do we have when we're doing the agreement study, basically we have the patients perform the finger prick method, get the results, and then we pull serum, pull blood from them, and then do the comparative testing? Just a little clarification on that.
Yeah, that would be the right order. So I don't believe we have a template for. I know we have home collection for serology on blood spot cards. I don't think our home. I don't think we have a template out for home serology testing.
So on laboratory serology.
Yeah.
So we're trying to bridge those two.
Yeah. So in any sort of home testing validation, we're trying to make sure that there's no bias introduced into the study. So you can do the home studies in a simulated environment, so that after the test has been used by the consumer, then healthcare professionals come in and take any additional samples that may be needed for the study. So I know we've issued a neutralizing antibody template. So I just look at that and kind of merge that with our home testing template.
Okay. All right. Because basically you've got a three-prong attack. You've got basically your usability study, and then to drive the clinical agreement, and then pulling samples to do the plaque neutralization, reduction neutralization test seems a little cumbersome for trying to organize all that.
So you don't have to combine your user usability studies into your clinical study if that's more challenging to you. It is more efficient if you can do all of that at once. So you would hand the patient the kit in a simulated environment. They would initiate and do testing. And then they would answer your usability and user study questions. They do the test. They read the test and interpret the test for usability studies. And then the healthcare professional will come in and collect a comparative sample. But you can separate out the pure clinical study from the user and usability studies, if that's easier for you to do. But I do like the idea of sending in a pre-EUA for this kind of test development. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Jody Schultz. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, I'm Jody Schultz from Thermo Fisher Scientific. As it relates to the new pooling guidance, I have a couple of questions. In reviewing the guidance, it appears that as part of the notifications to FDA to add in the specific claims for pooling, that a set of required validation data is required for that particular notification. And I wanted to just clarify that particular validation data is the analytical validation data and not the additional clinical performance study that may be needed from a post-authorization commitment standpoint. So that's the first question.
Yeah, the notification doesn't require you to submit the clinical study data. I'm going to turn this question over to Chris because he's much more familiar with the details of the policy.
Sure. I guess I didn't 100% follow the question because I'm not sure what the post-authorization piece is. But, within that amendment letter, there are the validation studies and acceptance criteria. And, if you meet those, you can, it's not a notification, but you can, it is similar to a notification, which you will, follow the directions in that particular guidance. And with the new instructions for use and the pooling protocol you have in there, and then we will add you to that Exhibit 1 and post your new IFU onto the website. And after that, then that pooling protocol is part of your EUA.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the question is, there were some pieces of the notification or of the guidance that spoke to a post-authorization commitment to bring in the clinical data. So the analytical data that I'm referring to is located in the appendices, as part of that particular notification. So I just wanted to clarify that, all you have to do is perform the testing, as in Appendix A through F, and then later on, submit the clinical testing, as a supplement.
So I'm not quite sure that there is a later on. I think, this is a kind of, if you're just going for that serial testing claim with pooling, everything that is needed for that claim is in that guidance and is, should be done prior to, granting the claim. If you're talking about perhaps, doing pooling without the serial claim, then I think, obviously there's other pathways for that. But everything should be in that particular amendment letter, and there really is no kind of post-EUA or post-authorization kind of commitment on your end.
And I may have misspoke, Chris. You want to see the data in the notification to the FDA, but once you submitted that, notified, and we've accepted it, then they're posted on a website, and we will not hold up them starting while we review the data. Is that
correct?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm confusing this notification policy with our previous notification policy. So we want to have all the data submitted in the submission, but you don't have to wait on launching for us to review that data.
Okay, I understand. And then the other question I had was, to your point about the serial testing. So does this particular guidance, must you perform the serial testing, as a claim, or can you obtain a pooling claim without serialized testing? Like, for example, in airlines, or other types of testing where you may not, the application may not be serial testing. So I'm just wondering if this pooling guidance could apply without the serial approach.
The older pathway is still open, I believe. Chris, do you have more specifics?
Of course, yes. Yep. You can always follow the template. That's perfectly valid. This current approach is not a guidance, right? This is a EUA amendment. So, it is a recipe that you can follow. And if you, kind of meet the outlined criteria, then you get the claims that are kind of described in the amendment. There's not an opportunity to kind of interpret things a little bit differently or kind of make adjustments to, what is acceptable and isn't acceptable, as we typically do in a guidance situation or in a template situation. But this is kind of, like I said, a kind of add A to B and get C type of authorization amendment, and it's that way to make this, as streamlined as possible, to get these claims, out there quickly.
Yeah, I think my question is, if you already have an EUA authorized test and you wanted to add pooling to it, could you use this approach without the serialized testing?
Again, no. The amendment is kind of what it is. This is serial testing is a major mitigation that we're proposing to ensure that, if you miss those folks on week 1, you're going to get them on week 2 when that viral load starts to kind of rise. There's a lot of becoming more and more literature available suggesting that, serial testing approaches are appropriate to, reduce transmission or reduce the risk of transmission. That's exactly kind of what we're trying to address with this particular amendment.
So what differs from this amendment, and Chris is using appropriate words, and it would matter, is that when you notify us under this new amendment, we will authorize you, versus previous sort of notification pathways. You could launch before we authorize you, and so it's a little bit different. We're providing the authorization up front if you fall into these specific, stipulations in this amendment that has been issued, without deviating from it. It's sort of an umbrella sort of situation where it's cookie cutter. You've got to fall into this these methods to fall under this new program, and then we issue an authorization for it, which is different than the prior sort of notification pathway.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. That was very helpful.
Our next question will come from Ella Holson. Your line is open.
Hi, my question is for an antigen saliva test regarding the cross-reactivity studies. In the antigen templates, there's a recommended list for organisms for respiratory specimens and blood specimens, but not for saliva specimens. So I'm wondering, is there such a list?
So thanks for bringing that up, because the other thing I forgot to mention at the top of the call was our continuing examination of saliva-based tests. So that for antigen-based tests, we're still cautious about that sample type for antigen tests, and I'll mention in a moment after I address your question for you, I'm going to answer your question. I'll go on to the, say, molecular tests after this. So, yes, we do have a list. So I would reach out through, I would actually encourage all test developers that are going for saliva now that they do a pre-EUA, so that we can review their study plans and analytical plans to make sure that they're appropriate for that sample type. But we do have a list, so if you just want the list to begin with, you can go to our templates email address and ask for that. But if you want to just submit a whole pre-EUA for your development and your studies, that is also advised.
Okay, thank you.
To address your question. And then I'll back up and talk a little bit more about saliva. So we are, when comparative studies are done between swab and saliva, and we ask for primarily for NP swab comparison to saliva, we are seeing occasionally significant differences between those two samples, and it always tends to show a decreased performance in saliva. So we're encouraging all developers that if they're in the process of validating saliva or want to validate saliva for their device, to come in with a pre-EUA and give us an opportunity to work with you on your study design and analytical studies. All right, next caller.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Anna Powell. Your line is open.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I have a question about home use serology antibody test. Two questions. The first one is, since we don't have a publicized the template yet, would FDA consider prescription needed or directly or over the counter? And if for over the counter, sorry.
Oh, you were breaking up a little bit, so I wasn't understanding all the words. So you're talking about a home use serology test, and then if you could repeat your questions, that would be helpful.
Sure. So questions regarding home use serology antibody test. First question is regarding whether a prescription will be needed by FDA. And if it's no prescription needed, would a reporting capability be required, like the antigen home test?
Okay, those questions are clear. I'll understand things. So the first thing I would recommend is that you do submit a pre-EUA for home serology test, since we haven't authorized one before, and we don't have a template out there. In general, for home use tests, we don't require a prescription if the OTC over-the-counter validations are done. And one of the major differences between RX and OTC is that usability study where a user not only performs the test and reads the test, but accurately interprets the results of the test. And we have assurance that home users can use a test appropriately. As far as reporting goes, there's no current legal requirement for home use tests, in-home tests to report, and therefore the FDA is not making that a requirement at the time of first authorization. We are asking developers up front what their plans are for reporting, because that's a good thing to encourage. And then we would follow up an authorization with a requirement of authorization to come up with a subsequent reporting mechanism. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Yes, I have a second part of the question, but I'd like to make a correction for what you just said. FDA has approved a home collection, but not home use yet, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. So the second part of the same question regarding home use antibody test is if we want to conduct a study, should we include vaccinated people, either included as a total number for clinical study subjects, or we can create an additional group, provide additional data in recruiting some vaccinated people?
So vaccines and serology tests are a little bit more complicated than vaccines and antigen or molecular tests. So for antigen and molecular tests, you just want to know if any of your subjects in the study were vaccinated, and we want to analyze the data, subset of data for vaccinated individuals. It could be that their viral levels are lower if they have breakthrough infection, and we just want to understand that. For serology, it can really interfere with our assessment of the test performance. So I would come in with a pre-EUA again with that question to our team about what you'd like to do, and we'll give you specific feedback. And it obviously is going to be a challenge going forward with individuals as the percent of our population gets at least one vaccination. Now it's over 50% of our U.S. population.
So yes, if that's the reason we're considering to include that group. So if the data is strong, supporting good performance, detecting antibody response, post a specific vaccine, would FDA review the data and consider to allow it?
Again, I recommend. I don't think I can give you a specific detailed response here, and I would encourage you to submit a pre-EUA along with your study design and what you want to do in that study.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. And we do have time for one last question. Our last question will come from Susan Sharp. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks again, guys. I just wanted to give Chris an opportunity to give us the name of that swab pooling test.
Thank you.
So we don't forget.
Yeah, thank you. So we don't have, it's not public. We don't have authorized swab pooling right now. We are in negotiations with a number of folks in kind of the pre-EUA stage. So I did get that confused, but thank you for bringing that back up. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I will now turn the conference back over to Ms. Irene Ihere.
Thank you. This is Irene Ihere. We appreciate your participation and thoughtful questions during today's town hall. Today's presentation and transcript